The first time in this week that the audience is silent before somebody starts talking. This is excellent. Thank you very much for being so attentive, for being so much eager to finalize this conference. And it takes another 1.5 hours, more or less. I'm sorry for that. But it's also nice to see a full room, even upstairs. And we are entering into the final program part, which is called Research Agenda. And we have invited one person to present a very first rough draft of a research agenda that we compiled on behalf of session leaders, on behalf of some participants, on behalf of the organizing committee, and we are wondering how you think about it. This will be presented by Thomas Breu, and it will be followed by a panel discussion on it, basically relating to 3 major themes. So I try to structure it a bit. And the panel discussion will go straight into questions, and we will not let the panelists introduce themselves very long, so we do it short. But I introduce Thomas Breu. Thomas is the coordinator of the NCCR North-South. He's over there. Coming now up, Thomas is also the director of the International Graduate School North-South that we implement between Basel, Zurich, and Bern, a joint venture between 3 universities, which you could also already consider as a miracle, because normally universities don't collaborate very much. They are more competitive. But in our case, they have agreed to be collaborative, and so we are carrying out this IGS North-South, and we hope that more universities will join. And the interesting part is that we would like to associate some key southern universities to it so that we can do joint trainings in the future for capacity development, basically, in research on global transformation. Thomas, I give you the word.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming in such a high number. What I have to do is actually to squeeze a very condensed draft research agenda further down to almost 0. So I try to do it within 10 minutes. Maybe it goes a little bit longer. Okay. So let's start straight away. Why another research agenda? This morning I made a quick and fairly unscientific review survey with Google. That is also a major tool in research, or becoming a major tool, unfortunately. And the term research agenda delivered 3.3 million hits. Then I thought, okay, that is a little bit too much. Let's try it with narrowing down it to research development agenda, or in this direction. So taking into consideration development. Still there, I got an average of 300,000 hits. So what is different of our research agenda? What is the added value? We have observed that in global change research, so far, there were mainly separated agendas, meaning certain disciplines were drawing their research agenda, naming issues to be tackled, themes to be addressed. Others were more looking at the policy, research policy interface, and some others were more looking on the translation process between research and society. And last but not least, there were quite a number also of agendas on research for education for sustainable development. So, who are we going to address? I think that might be also a topic to the panel. What is the audience we are targeting? We think that this research agenda, which reflects mainly the NCCR North-South experience over the last 11 years, can also be regarded as a vast pool of experience, lessons learned, where we can draw on for other initiatives, and it can also be regarded as some kind of a legacy of this long-term program. So it is most probably geared towards the research community, but at the same time also at funding agencies, policymaker, research donor agencies. We think that this agenda, draft agenda, is quite timely. In the final document of the Rio Plus 20 conference, the need for science and particularly of research for development was underlined. Special emphasis was given to capacity development and with a particular emphasis on developing and transition countries. On the background of new upcoming initiatives like the Future Earth Initiative, which we had discussed during this conference, but also with regard to the post-MDG process, we think that, or we believe that key for the success will be adapted, development-oriented, sound knowledge to tackle the challenges ahead. So, how did we get the information? We made it quite straightforward. We sent out to the board of directors, but also to all session conveners, a questionnaire asking different questions. Then we took it back and tried to amalgamate, to synthesize, and to boil it down into a readable and somewhat meaningful form. So, let me start with this graph. It is also in the research agenda. When crossing unknown territory, compass can be pretty good. This one can be also regarded as a compass. So, if we look at the outer ring, here, all these 9 fields, we can see that these are mainly environmental issues. In 2009, international group of researchers under the lead of Johan Rockström proposed a set of 9 Earth system processes which are critical for keeping this planet in the stable state. So, they suggested that putting excessive stress on the critical processes, on these 9 processes, could lead to tipping points of abrupt and irreversible environmental change. So they also proposed a set of boundaries for avoiding those danger zones, what they eventually called a safer operating space for humanity. That's quite a compelling approach for environmental sustainability, we think. But what was absent, glaringly absent from the picture, was the social dimension, the economic dimension. So Oxfam complemented it with an inner circle and combined it with the concept of social boundaries. So now, in between acceptable social boundaries and not accessing the environmental boundaries, there is the place they suggest where future development should take place. Now, the research themes, which were listed by the ICRD participants, you can see on the right hand, they were named from the planetary boundaries, or from the environmental side, issues regarding biodiversity, land use change, climate change, and water use. Social foundations, so the addressing the inner circle, there were actually more mentionings. So there were livelihoods, poverty and disparities, health and sanitation, statehood and conflicts, food security, migration, gender. No wonder most of the respondents were from within the NCCR, and it quite perfectly reflects also our major fields of research. Now, a last conceptual issue. It is relatively seldom that research for sustainable development aims purely at knowledge gains in form of new research results. In most cases, it is implicit that these results should be societally relevant and have an impact. It is also implicit that most research actions should and do contribute to the individual and institutional capacities and competencies of those involved. However, practical experience and also theoretical considerations suggest that these three basic goals of research for sustainable development are in conflict, and trade-offs between these three different goals cannot be avoided, but at least be minimized. So let's go a little bit further in. We tried to subdivide the different arenas of postulates regarding ideal research for sustainable development, meaning research which is sound and societally relevant and contributes to capacity development, into three areas. One is the research approach, then the second one, capacity development, and then lastly we were looking at the research policy implementation interface. So the research approach. This is also a quasi-output of the NCCR North-South, the many cartoons of Karl Herweg. If he's here, many thanks. I did not ask you whether I can use it. I would briefly touch upon the different postulates which we have drawn up. Transdisciplinarity. For us, transdisciplinary research approaches is the best approach for a fruitful interdisciplinary, disciplinary cooperation while taking into account societal or non-scientific knowledge. Then we think that the recursive research approach is best suited for getting meaningful results and impacts. So we think that an iterative process, interactions between disciplines, between society and science, yields much better results than conventional research approaches. Then types of knowledge. We are convinced, and also taking into account Proclim, who formulated the three different knowledge goals, meaning target knowledge, transformation knowledge, and systems knowledge, have to be addressed all, but maybe not at the same time, but they have to be addressed. Normally, researchers tend to address only the systems knowledge, looking how systems functions, what are the dynamics, and rather neglect or tend to neglect the target knowledge, which is looking where wants a society to go, or transformation knowledge, what is needed to make a real change in the real world. Then an issue which was repeatedly and intensively discussed, how we can cope with it, we have still not the solution, is the question about contextuality and generalization. It is a challenge. We need contextual knowledge. At the same time, we need also generalization. Therefore, cross-scale approaches or other methods will have to be refined or further developed in order that we can avoid the so-called idiographic trap, where each case is single and unique and cannot be upscaled or outscaled to a higher aggregation level. Then scientific innovation. This morning, Bridget Obrist made some very interesting statements which we think we could further look at. Actually, she said somewhat that the reference system needs to be the disciplinary orientation of researchers. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that we should neglect interdisciplinary cooperation and exchange with society, because actually there also innovation happens best. Let's go further. Capacity development. One thing which was quite important from the NCCR North-South, this has nothing to do with reality, of course. There we agree with the UNESCO statement that knowledge societies are critical for human development and sustainable development. And, of course, to arrive at this highly ambitious goal, tertiary education is a must and is indispensable and should also be regarded as important, not least by the development cooperation side. Capacity development, we believe, as already mentioned, that it must build on sound disciplinary skills, but however, we need also conceptual and methodological skills for bridging disciplines and for entering into exchange with society and policy. Then research and capacity development. We believe that education and research are inextricably linked and cannot be divided. So we cannot just do research and forget about education. It makes also not much sense just to do education and forget about research, as it happens often in the South. Then research partnerships, I don't need to lose too much words. Jan Andrielis is here. He will criticize me then afterwards. Of course, we believe that research partnerships are very effective means for societal relevant research and development. Then alliances and networks. A last point we made. We are convinced that we should focus on program approaches, that we need to have alliances, that we need to work in networks, else we do not succeed in producing the knowledge which is needed. Last point, not least, of course, the research policy implementation interface. IDRC, the Canadians, which are quite strong in all these issues, they said there is no sense in doing useful research if policy ignores it. So it makes no sense. As we have heard also from John Young from ODI, research is only one of several elements needed for shaping policies and decision making. It is also evident that even the best knowledge does not automatically percolate into policy and development practice. So, to overcome this, we believe that contextualized knowledge and especially also timely information, we have taken note of that, of the gap between research takes place until research results are getting available is often a little bit too long, especially for policy and practice. Then we also believe that increased investments in communication is a need. It is from the research funding agencies often not really reflected. It is also needed, as not all researchers are good communicators, and in order that one can also engage brokers, facilitators, moderators for bridging the research policy gap. Then the peer systems. There also, when we look at most of you are researchers, how are we rewarded? We are valorized by purely scientific measures. So, number of peer-reviewed publications, then books, it's already quite not so important, but still it's okay. But whether somebody has an impact on society, on development relevance, there is no system in place and also no rewarding system. It can even hamper scientists, researchers in bridging, in getting in touch with policy and implementation, because the reference systems they have to obey is quite lopsided. Then a last point, self-reflexive research. We also believe that the question that there is too little research on the understanding how the interface between research and policy functions, how this can be made more fruitful and more effective, and so we are calling for more investments, especially also in this area. A last slide. Where do we go from here? I think we leave it to the panel where we do go from here. We somehow hope that if we can endorse whatever agenda, that this might also be a motivation to the researchers to more engage in development relevant research, in engaging with different stakeholders from the start to the end of a research endeavor. We hope also, when we look at institutions, that it might be considered some aspects at least, especially also for the new global initiatives, how research could be shaped, how interaction could be enhanced, and the necessary provisions are made. So the next steps, I think the panel will discuss it. Surely we acknowledge this research agenda is by far not completed yet. We made it on purpose also to leave room to find the right format, to find out conflicting areas, to find out gaps, and to discuss it in general. Okay, with that I would like to call the moderator and the chair of this session, and I would like to thank you for giving me too much time. Thank you very much. It was me.
You have to put your yours or what? Is it working? No? Hello? Hello? It's great. Wow. Yeah, klar. Thank you very much, Thomas, for giving me the microphone and for your presentation. With this, I invite the panelists to come up front, and I have to apologize that for you, Vishnu, you have another chair here. We'll give you one just now. Vishnu. Ja, warte, ich tue nicht dazu schienen. Ja, genau. Gut. This is nice. You will not be alone. So, and in order that it is not too boring, we will again project all of us on the wall so you can still find yourself and see whether your eyes were open or closed when he took the picture. I invite now the panelists to talk about it, and I have prepared a little bit on the research agenda. Some questions, I give you all of them so you can decide yourself where you want to emphasize right from the beginning. And we others, we don't know what is being asked. I will not ask each of you to make a 5-minute introduction because we don't want to lose all the time for this. We go straight into the questions, and I have grouped it into 3 major parts. we would have a small talk about the proposed research agenda. Why do we need it at all? Or do we not need it at all? And if we do need it, to whom would we address it? This is a basic question. And then, of course, related to a research agenda, we should always ask also, to whom would the research product have to go? The research results we want to produce, for whom are they? To whom are they addressed? Where shall we translate it if we follow Thomas' proposed research agenda? This is the first series of questions I will ask. The second one will more relate to the research community, the role of the community, which thematic ways should it go, which approaches, principles would you consider most important in this type of research, and how do we address effectively the interface between research impact and capacity development. That's my second range of things we do. And the third one is about institutions. What is the role of research and donor institutions both in the North and the South? How can research be facilitated, particularly in the Global South? How do we enable researchers to find enabling environments when they start research somewhere? And how can knowledge and databases and experiences be maintained once the research is over? Or is it just somewhere in books at the end? These are the three major directions: proposed agenda, research community, and institutional. And I would propose we invest about 15 minutes into it, into each of them, and I will cut every 15 minutes and go to the next point. And of course, you are all invited not just to cool yourself, that's what you already do effectively, but to interfere whenever you have something to ask. So when I see raised hands, I try to remember you, and when the speaker is over, I will give you a word. And now I will not ask all of you to respond to all of the questions. I will just go one by one of the questions and see who of the panelists has an interest to say something. And you don't have to answer all of them. And even if you're silent for 45 minutes, it will be like this, isn't it? We have to accept that. Okay, why do we need a research agenda at all? Why did we develop such a proposal? Rupa. Rupa Mukherjee is from Helvetas and I think India, yes. Am I right? And you work with Helvetas.
Thank you. Yes, I now live in Switzerland, but from India for the past 1 year in Switzerland. I feel we need a research agenda for purposes of transparency, to build alliances. I come from an implementation organization working in a developing country. I find that there are a lot of research projects that are ongoing on a particular topic in a particular setting without adequate interfaces between them. So I think it's very important that the research agenda is transparently communicated. It's available for people to understand the long-term commitments that are made. And it enables building of alliances, people to come together, avoid duplication, etc. It's also a document that promotes dialogue.
Next is, thank you, Rupa. Next is Bassirou Bonfoh. He is director of the CSRS, Côte d'Ivoire, the Centre Suisse de Recherche Scientifique, and you are a professor also in a university in West Africa, I think. And you are out.
Okay, thank you very much. If I consider where we are coming from, I think we have done many years of research. And for me, each research at the end also raise new research questions. And by doing that, we can at the end elaborate using all those research questions and plan. In French, we call it pilotage à vue. Right. You cannot just move as a researcher without having a guidance. But for me, by setting this research agenda is important, but it needs, as we do our research, it needs to be validated. And we need to find the way to validate this research agenda with the audience, be it the communities or the decision makers, because we are only researchers, and we can contribute and use this agenda to be shared with the other part of the community. Because if we look as scientists, we are not alone in this world. We have other actors playing in that, and we need to challenge ourselves using this research agenda. So it's very important to set this up.
So we have two voices for it. Next is Michel Mordasini. He is Assistant Director General of SDC and the head of the Directorate on Global Cooperation. So I think the money for the future comes from your side, isn't it?
Well, you say this, which doesn't mean that I'm against, no? Okay. So, no, I would say for researchers to engage regularly in trying to set the agenda for research in the evolving international context. And I think the also evolving and changing environment in developing countries. I think it's a must. And I think it was very clever, certainly, to use the presence of so many people from so many countries here to reflect and to try shape some element of research agenda versus the huge new demands, no? The world and all of us, we are confronted with. Second point is also, I think we need, obviously, always to bring in the research discussion, first and foremost, the need for a truly independent research, but at the same time, a research that is also positioned with the reality of available resources, financial resources for research there. So I think setting priorities, making choice, it's not an easy task, but at the same time, it has to be a burden shared by researchers too.
Yeah. Thank you. We will come to the choices under the next point again, but so far we have three positions for it, and there was Marcel wanting to ask something. Marcel Tanner.
Yes, thank you very much.
The microphone is coming. I think it's easier for the upstairs.
Yes, upstairs. Yes, I cannot climb upstairs. Yes, thank you very much, Hans, and everybody. I've been privileged to be associated with some of these research agenda in other fields and also linked to development. And there we had a successful consultation process with people from all over the world, always involving, like in the NCCR, hundreds of people from different settings, scientists as well as people involved in application, program managers and so on. And what proved there to be very useful is to be much more specific on the research questions. It's not so much the issues. Here we agree basically that gender is an issue and that the equity is an issue and so on. But what are the specific questions? A science is about research questions, not about terms of references. And the thing is that I would think we would move and we could use this rich resource of where we all come from to really be more specific in formulating the questions. I like the contextual thing. I think it's absolutely crucial to move with the research agenda. I'm fully for it, but more specificity, not only in terms of questions, but also in time. When do you have to have a question solved? So just to have a series of questions and say, then everything will be fine, we must be sometimes a little bit rigid in time. That's what I would advise, and there are some examples that we just went through. Malaria eradication, elimination, decade of vaccine has very nicely brought this together and could be a sort of an inspiration for us. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Laurent Goetschel.
Yes, thank you very much.
Swiss Peace.
Yes. And, well, I have to start now with a negative statement, I think, to bring in some atmosphere. Huh? And, but I will make it in a rather subtle way, meaning that first I will say, actually, I guess researchers don't need such kind of research agenda. Thomas, sorry for being now a little bit blunt, but I think this is also good for the future process. I mean, when I saw the contents which came out, no, but it's referring to your presentation. Huh? when I saw the topics, I thought, well, actually, these are more or less exactly the same topics we had 12 years ago. And which is not at all against these topics. They are still important. But I guess researchers themselves, the way they function, if they function well in a scientific environment, they develop the incentives and particularly also their intrinsic motivations to do research on the questions which pop up within the scientific milieu. And they don't need assemblies even of thousands of people involved in North-South issues to develop a research agenda. The topics, and particularly also the questions, Marcel, you mentioned, I mean, they come from within the disciplines, maybe sometimes even the partial disciplines, in exchange between North and South and so on. So I guess research doesn't need such an agenda. However, I think the funders, the partners from the outside, Michel Mordasini, you mentioned it, how to prioritize certain issues and activities, how to get support from the parliament, from the administration. There we need issues, we need risks, we need all these kinds of future problems. And for these partners, for these actors, we definitely need an agenda, but we shouldn't mix both. So we should have an agenda which mobilizes external support in a very positive and honest way, but at the same time which leaves all the research freedom to the actual actors in the field of research developing their own questions.
Yeah, yeah. There was Roger, and then the last word will be yours, Bijnu.
Okay, well, I'm very glad that Laurent has said what he said, because I agree with him absolutely, and I'd like to make sure that that approach is left open. I am involved in as an advisor on the ESRC DFID program in the UK, and there I see the same kind of process of attempting to develop a research agenda and then turn that into areas of priority. And I think it's very easy at the end of such a bureaucratic process to exclude new ideas, to exclude those topics that come from one side, to exclude those ideas that actually require maybe a 15 or 20-year period of gestation before they might be able to contribute to policy debates. And that it's important to keep both sides in mind. I'm not suggesting that there should be no agenda, but I think any agenda is at risk of being taken over by people who will see that in a rigid and uninspired way.
Thank you, Roger. Just to say, Roger is a member of our review panel of the NCCR since its inception. And that has been very useful all the time. And the last goes to Bijnu.
Thank you, Hans. I think we also need a little bit how we set the agenda, because whether we need the research agenda or not is one part, but beyond that is how we set the research agenda, particularly for this development-oriented type of research which we are talking about, because there are so many actors and so many stakeholders engaged in, and if someone, whether they are the research group or the aid agencies or the beneficiaries group, if one group only sets the agenda, perhaps the ownership is the great question. In that sense, what I feel is that setting agenda together, and for that, this type of research agenda, bringing to the public, debating and discussing, and making the ownership is fundamentally important. So in that sense, setting agenda is the first step of developing the sustainability-oriented research. So in that sense, it is absolutely essential.
Good, thank you very much. There was an intervention, Urs Wiesmann. You need a microphone, otherwise they don't hear you.
I absolutely agree with what Laurent has said. I think the specific point of this one...
It's okay.
You must not. Okay, I start again. I agree that it is dangerous, and probably these many hints which Thomas has found in the internet, they are just lists of themes, or perhaps if they go a bit further, they're lists of research questions. What we were aiming at here, and perhaps the word research agenda is not right, is to say if you want to contribute to sustainable development, you have to choose or overcome certain difficulties in developing the research themes and the research questions. Value loads, participation, North-South, and so on. So it is less about themes and research questions, but it's about the approach and how it links to capacity development, how it links to the research policy interface. And I think this is really missing. And there we could make out of our, but perhaps we have to find a different word for it, a different name to sell it.
Yeah. With this, we go to the next couple of questions. We did not really answer to whom the research should serve, the results. And that for me is a basic question that remains a bit open. Should it serve the development agencies? Or should it serve the target groups with whom you did identify your topic? Where should research go? Should you always generalize it and then make it applicable on a global level? Or should you stay there where you did it and apply it there? That is a question maybe in the second point, when we talk about the research community's involvement, as individuals or as groups, we should think about what is the primary goal of our research? Is the donut that you presented, Thomas, this Oxfam a picture of planetary boundaries and inner boundaries and the secure space for sustainable development, is that a good guiding, or is it already a limiting guiding? Is it already something where we could disagree, or we would like to agree, or should we be much more specific and give themes that are very detailed, like now in the Research for Development program, where the themes are terribly defined? I say that it is almost impossible to form a research group around it. Or should we remain a bit open to leave room for participatory approaches, for negotiations with southern institutions on the goals, on the topics? These are questions relating to the research community's involvement. And then, of course, what approach, what principles, we already heard it. And, of course, how do we meaningfully address research, capacity, and impact? These are the three goals that you have no choice of going around it. You can only do it together. And I start with you, Jakob, to say something about it. You need a microphone. Yes. Jakob Zinstag from Swiss TPH.
Well,
yeah, it works.
I would like to report from our workshop on integrative methods that there are two issues. If stakeholder participation is incomplete, it can lead to catastrophic outcomes. And second point, many projects have unintended outcomes or consequences. So I think we have to be very careful in setting agendas a priori. I think the process of scoping what are the key stakeholders in any situation is the first thing, and then be very, very open to such unintended consequences and able to react.
Yeah. And now I leave the panel to react. Do you have an immediate saying on this? Bassirou and Michel?
I think I said something which was, I don't know if it was understood. The agenda as we set it, be it research question or whatever, for me the validation is important, and through this process of validation you can find actors who are interested in different aspects, and from there you can move forward. Coming back to the second question, as we know, we are not, as researchers, we are not living in the world alone. We are connected with many aspects. If we are doing research on disciplinary way to understand the phenomena or to find specific solution, we can set this agenda and work in isolation. But if we want to tackle development issues, is where we need to have a big umbrella. And for me, by linking impact, capacity, and research, is very important. And I have to say that again, to set up the research environment first, because we cannot set the agenda start doing research if the environment is not well established. If I consider, for example, our institution in the South that need to be strengthened and built prior to whatever we want to do.
Yeah. I see a lot of nodding, and the next word is Michel.
Yeah, I would, of course, I give the perspective of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, a donor perspective. And I would say from this perspective, I believe we have quite some high level of clarity on what we try to achieve and engage with research. First, I think on the first question, which was not responded before, I would say for us there is no ambiguity that this research component that we are engaging with has to relate to the agenda of fighting poverty and addressing global risks facing developing countries. I think this is clear, and I think this is the base we are building our engagement with research. The second, you mentioned terribly defined priorities or themes in the R4D program of SDC. I suppose all of you know about R4D, or if it's not the case, there is.
I think it's well known. I
hope.
known. Yeah.
And we are several in the room that can respond to additional questions, so don't hesitate later. But I would say that instead of using the terribly defined, I would say the excellently defined. It's the same, but a different perspective.
I like it.
Frankly, I think these themes, when we are trying to engage research to know more on the causes of and the solutions to social conflicts in fragile environment, when we want to engage with research on the provision systems and the financing mechanism for public health sectors with innovation, when we want to engage on knowing more the potential and constraints of employment in the context of sustainable development. Perhaps it's not clear. For us, it's very clear at SDC. And I think this is exactly the axis, and there is no ambiguity, the axis with which we want to engage with research. The specific questions Professor Tanner was mentioning before, we are not asking these questions. The scope is there. The independence and the openness for research to query, to look at different facets and perspectives is there. But at the same time, as a donor agency, we basically focus on something which has a very specific goal and aim for us. I just conclude by saying that obviously research is not only looking at public donor agencies. I think you have many actors out there, no? Private sector foundations, private sector, and everybody with different perspectives. So basically the scope for research and research funding is much broader than what we can offer. But for me, I think we need to be very clear from a development cooperation perspective. I think it's natural and normal that we are setting clear priorities, clear ambitions, and that we ask and call the researchers to help and to contribute.
Thank you, Michel. You have excellently set the frame conditions for your research themes. Is it the enabling environment you are looking for, Bassirou?
No, I went to, maybe I don't know if I understood. If we said we set agenda, who set agenda and for who? I think this is your question. And if I listen to what he said, it can be a donor perspective. And at what time, me, for example, in the South, can I fit in your agenda, or can I take into account your agenda if I was not part, or I don't consider that the agenda you set is fitting with my environment? It's a question, especially when the agenda is touching to my context or to the way I live things in my context.
You may reply. Yeah, we are still here.
Sorry, I don't want to monopolize, but I think this is very important. I think where is the perspective when we are talking of the research agenda?
Yeah.
I was giving the narrow perspective of a donor actor. I would like to add that from the donor perspective, this is also not coming out of the sky there. I think it builds, in the case of Switzerland, of 12 years close involvement in funding and supporting the NCCR process. And I think the 5 teams we are talking about for the R4D are not really a big surprise for anybody who has been involved with the NCCR process for a long time. But I think your point is very pertinent. I think the donor perspective is a narrow one perspective. It has to not to influence the rest. I think it is part of the clarity, elements that have to be taken into account. But hopefully, I think the research agenda we were talking about is coming from the research side, no? This is the way I understood it. But,
I give word to Vishnu, whom I didn't introduce, really. He's a regional coordinator of the NCCR in Nepal.
Thank you, Hans. When we talk about that issue, particularly the research community and also the agenda setting, we need to look a little bit beyond, but what beyond the SDC, what I realize is that often this type of the tension I very clearly see everywhere I go in this type of the forum. Donors have their own priority, they have their own criteria, and of course there is very strong logic, and there is other side as well. And how to bring these two perspectives together is basically, if we look to the perhaps the Swiss innovation, this KFP principle, and if we look there, there is some mechanism by which this type of differences can be easily addressed, that is precisely setting agenda together. Whether in this R4D it was properly addressed or not, I don't know, because I am Nepal. Maybe the Swiss research community were engaging here. But what I realize is that if there is the common goal is the common for the donors, research community, and the recipient local people to address the challenges of the sustainable development, like the theme which we identified. The collective effort is needed. And why donors are giving the money to that program and why researchers are doing that research is to improve the situation. And that situation can be improved only by the collective common understanding and the collective ownership. If there is somehow the difference in opinion, because this is the conditionality we have and this is the demand we have, and if there is no common platform for understanding right from the beginning, then at that time it will create still some confusion and unclarity. So that is the area where donor and specifically SDC, because now the issue came here with SDC, needs to think as well.
Good, thank you. Laurent, I think you wanted to say?
Yes, just quickly. I mean, I guess in regard to the themes, the topics, and it relates to what I said regarding the research agenda. I mean, there has to be a lot of openness, and I think there also is a lot of openness, and SDC is not the only research funder for research regarding North-South issues, so we still keep some alternatives, at least I think I see it that way. However, where it is very important that there is a strong involvement, and maybe this touches more to the next point, Hans, otherwise you will interrupt me, is relating to the structural conditions under which such research can meaningfully be undertaken, especially not regarding only research, which, I mean, the main aim of research is to better explain or even understand certain phenomena. This has to stay like this. But if we are talking about North-South research, I guess it also goes into the field of impact and capacity building. And this has to be seen as an integral part of this type of research. Otherwise, it loses its specificity. And there, I guess, more involvement of persons linked to the respective fields and research projects could be envisaged for the future.
Thank you, Laurent. There are two interventions, one by Ulrike and one by Dominique. Maybe you can start, Ulrike.
Yeah, I think this question to whom research shall serve uses a question how to communicate with these different groups. I think within the research community we have very clear rules how to we do it. For example, if we do research, we first of all have to know the state of the art in this field. But if I communicate with donors or with stakeholders, this is the right word, there are other rules. And I feel we have to invest a lot of thoughts. We do it with this transdisciplinarity thinking. But I think there is this weakness, you know, how to communicate as a researcher with people, SDC people in a country. How to do it, how to feel forms where we can do it. I think there is a lot of, this is the following question, yeah? Not only to whom, but how.
Yeah, but how, yeah. Thank you. Dominic, if you could hand it on to Dominic behind you. Dominic Riechen is from SDC in the section, in the division of Michel Mordasini, responsible for our research.
Thank you, Hans. SDC is actually represented at the panel, so the reason I want to say a word is there's another partner involved in this research program, which is the Science Foundation. And when we talk about defining the agenda, we have to take into account that the definition of the topics, the conception of the research program has been a very long, sometimes very difficult process with our partner. And so I think to respond to some of the interventions from your side, from the community, research community side, and the research perspectives is to some extent represented by the Research Council involved in this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this addition, which was important, of course. And the program will also be handled by the Swiss National Science Foundation with your participation, of course, but it's their procedure. And we are not so happy about that as well. Any more intervention on this field? I'm sorry, Peter Messerli. The microphone is coming.
Yeah, just a remark from a little bit a distance. This week we have heard many times about the year 2050, of course linked to climate issues, but many others as well. And we felt there is an urgency of change, and we said development cooperation as business as usual cannot do it. Research with business as usual will not do it. It must be sustainable development oriented research. Yeah. A little bit on that background, I think we are here with an interesting set of partners. We have research partners from the north and from the south. We have development partners here from Switzerland, but we know there are also development partners from the south. And I think the key question is, how can we build new types of partnerships? Saying we need sustainable development which is based on knowledge, and they are intrinsically linked, development and knowledge. As long as we pursue intentional goals, it must be linked to knowledge. So the key question somewhere is, how can we invent something new that improves development cooperation and gives it new opportunities, and of course improves scientific work, because it will not happen by itself. So the key question is, how do we come up with new types of collaborations between development and research? How can we build true partnerships where it's mutually fruitful and we mutually go into new directions? And on that background, I think this is a different type of thinking than perhaps more mandated research on certain topics, where I think consultants are also good to do mandated knowledge production. And I think it's more the thrive for new types of partnership that provokes also these reactions.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. With this, I would like to go to the third part. Unless, Rupa, you would like to add to the second. I feel that you would like to add to the second part still.
It sort of bridges, so I can take
Okay,
you to the
please,
third.
do the bridging.
Yes. I think we all feel this sense of urgency for having better knowledge in a situation of great uncertainty about the projected climate scenario, about the impacts in various sectors. So we deal in a rapidly changing context with uncertain knowledge, with too many uncertainties, and the sense of urgency to have better collaborations where knowledge, new knowledge can be created faster than it has been, can feed into what we do in practice. Now, I think this triangle works quite well, and the capacity building that NCCR has been able to do in the South is very important, and I think it's exemplary in certain senses. But the communication challenge is what impedes, I think, significantly better cooperation. We really do not have the time for a 2-year context analysis to be completed and, perfect knowledge to be available for information to be provided to policymakers or practitioners. It's a bit of the elevator test. Can you summarize your research in 5 main bullet points that one can communicate in an elevator going up? It's impossible for many researchers, I feel. And that's where we feel a challenge. We spend a lot of money on research. There is a lot of desire to connect, but the connections become quite difficult.
Yeah. With that, we are really into the institutional settings, because capacity development doesn't go without institutional settings. And there we have really the question, what is the role of research and donor institutions in the North and the South in relating to institutional setting? Can research be facilitated, and how can it be facilitated in the South? And how can knowledge and databases be maintained beyond the lifespan of projects? These are questions relating to how do we establish settings in the South. Who would like to interfere in this part, last part? Do I see somebody? Yeah, I'm sorry, you may have to identify yourself, and you need a microphone. Just hand it in. The hand, here, yeah. You will get it. Okay. You get 2 now. You can make a stereo intervention.
It's Carolina Obregon. I'm a researcher working in Lausanne. And I address my point is to the fact about the setting of research. And I'm curious about the fact you ask yourself how to establish a better communication with the South. But my issue here is based in my research. I'm working in basic research, and we have a lot of problems to work with physicians. How even here, having the same background, having the same language, we don't communicate very good. In fact, if you have a grant in basic research, basic science, what it's doing here is trying to establish a disease from humans in animal models. So part of the grant is establishing the model, and the other part of the grant is resolving the problem in the mice. But very few of that is translated in humans. So my question is here, are you ready to work in how you can communicate with the human beings and solving social and healthy problems in humans before to go to the South, where the complexity of the question is higher?
Thank you. I don't know if you can reply to this big question, of course, but Vishnu?
No, I'm not trying to reply, but
okay.
I'm just
you take up,
bring some
you
of
take
the
up in general.
to bring some issue to the forum for the discussion for the panelists. One of the realizations I have in my work experience, working 17 years in development cooperation field and 16 years now in research field, what I realize is that this capacity building part is gradually left away by the international development cooperation and limited only to the primary education or secondary education. But if we are talking about the big challenges which Thomas listed there, and to address that, the knowledge society is fundamentally important. How knowledge society will develop, because without investing in the capacity, particularly in the South, it is not possible. I would not be staying here with the very known professor and in between the SDC Deputy Director General if I was not able to get the chance to study, and that study was funded partly by Swiss and partly by Dutch. That is the reality in the South. Often those who are coming, they are getting some sort of capacity building support in the past and coming. So in that sense, first and foremost for me, if we want to really do the research which is responsible to address the challenge challenges that needs the capacity building, not only the individual, but also the institutional.
Yeah, thank you. Bassirou?
Yeah, I want to add on what Bishnu said. If I consider our African countries, it's commonly considered that education and higher education is well funded if you look at the budget. And the way now donors are leaving out the capacity, especially in research, it's just like now we are hanging in between. But if I consider what the NCCR North-South has done for the last 11 years, we have now very good platform with different stages. Those platforms, some are virtual platform, some are well-established institution platform. And it's where it's very important to consider those platforms if you want good research to be done in the South. Because, as I said in the beginning, we need a very good research environment. If you set a very good agenda or whatever, and you come, you don't have a very good environment, I don't know how you will handle that. Because the Global South is not an area where you go only on tapping on data or resources or material, but it needs to be part of the system. And that's why this Global South network needs attention. I don't say to be supported, but it needs attention because the SDC and the Swiss Scientific Foundation have invested a lot in that. And this is what I want to say on.
This is an open issue that you address.
Yeah.
Michel?
Yes, and I am really pleased to build on what the two colleagues just said. I think, looking back, I think we have had 11, 12 years of very intense cooperation within the NCCR North-South. And I think what has been achieved in terms of setting platforms, some more flexible, some more anchored in institutions, I think it's a tremendous achievement. And I think we can all be proud of this partnership. The question is also moving forward. And I think for SDC, we are not disengaging from capacity building. We need, and we basically want to change axis of interaction with these centers, with these capacities which is now in place. And I think the programs, and Laurent was very right, I think the R4D is one component of the SDC research program. We will continue to invest 50 million per year, Swiss francs, in research. I think R4D is one fourth, 20% of it. There we have to find ways that centers and structures and capacities and platforms are playing their role, are truly being involved in the process. The difficulty for us as a donors is basically to have an open-ended budget support kind of approach. This is not possible to continue a budget support, direct cost support for selected few centers. This is not possible. But I think from an SDC perspective, we, as all the countries represented in this room, we own the World Bank. We own regional institutions, regional banks. They have also a responsibility in terms of supporting capacities building in research. We have to use this mechanism also to act. The second is, I think there will be windows, I think that we will capitalize on. We are talking now with the commission that Mr. Gottschall is president of, on how we can not go back to a full-fledged capacity building, but that we are not losing opportunities of matching, and that the partnerships that have evolved, I think, between research capacities in many partner countries with Swiss partner institutions here are also taking a responsibility for sustaining this capacity, and that this is not just being all pushed back to a development financing requirement. I'm sorry, too long, but I think this... I'm not sure even it was clear, so I hope.
I think it was very clear, Michel. No problem about that. There are 2 interventions, and I have 1 more minute. Sabine, Marcel, and Laurent. No microphone to Sabine Bieri?
Yeah, my voice is loud, but people upstairs might not be hearing it. Talking about achievements of the NCCR and capacity building, I was wondering, or I feel that we also need data and evaluation of what this really has, what it's been worth, or what this really has, what we have achieved in terms of capacity building. To my understanding, it's more than 200 people have finished their PhD within these 11 years. That's actually quite a great database, and some questionnaires have already been sent out. There has been a sort of a preliminary evaluation, and actually I think we should also build this empirical data further to see what are they doing now, how are they serving their countries in terms of sustainable development. We should do it now, we should do it in 5 years, and this not only to convince donors like SDC or other donors, but specifically also the institutions in the countries in the south, to convince them. It would be a powerful argument, to my understanding, to convince them that investment in capacity building on the university level in terms of research could really contribute and bring development forward. So I think that would be also an interesting question, and we need to build the data for that, and we already have actually a great source to start with.
Thank you. Marcel?
Thank you. Just a point to add. On the capacity building, what I tried to show you yesterday, you cannot have a project driving a site. We have done, and I think this is the important thing, the project should be part of a center, and what our task is, with all the PhD students, develop institutions. And I think this is actually giving also this autonomy and giving the academic freedom, and as we have examples that are successful. I'm a bit puzzled that so much is only SDC and donor community. I've understood my statement that on the agenda, that this is done together. Of course, all the stakeholders have to be done together. It's not focusing on SDC. But if we focus on Switzerland, in 2 centers we have achieved a situation whereby we have clearly support from SDC for some development activities and some applied research, versus support from the State Secretary for Science and Technology and Education, where it is for the research part, which again is a clear message that we make a separation, that you leave this creativity on and innovation and the academic freedom that some people seem to horribly afraid of, that this is actually with an agenda constraint, which it is not at all. We discussed it with coffee and on the boat. And I think this is something which is a model which we would achieve. And it is also a model that shows, with such support of developing a center, you attract afterwards from many, many others funds for targeted actions or more comprehensive action. This can be documented in figures and in numbers, and I think just would like to bring this in as a reflection. And I thought this, we are on the good track here, and we have many grains that we must let crystallize. And don't forget, we must also nurture the weeds, the rainforest yesterday. Thank you.
With this, I give my last word to Laurent.
Thank you very much, Hans. Maybe just first to react on what Marcel said. I mean, of course, he's completely right, but what he said and the examples he had in mind, without mentioning them explicitly, are heavily linked to specific disciplines, which are closer to natural sciences, and where it may also be, relatively speaking, it's not easy at all, but it may be relatively easier to establish such centers and to also find alternative funding sources than in the field of social sciences. And I guess North-South research also has a lot to contribute, especially also in the field of social sciences. And this being said, just a second point I originally wanted to make, I guess that within the NCCR North-South, there were at least 2 types of objectives, and one was research linked to the SNF, and the other one was also capacity building linked to SDC and the Southern partners. And the fact that the whole thing was coming along as NCCR also brought with it the obligation to finish it at a certain time period. And partly, at least also for that reason, also the Southern component was terminated. That was at least the arguments we also got regarding these decisions. And I assume also as president of the commission mentioned by Michel Mordasini, the Commission for Research Partnerships with in the North-South field, that we will find alternative ways and modes to also keep up with at least part of this support for the Southern partners, because without the supports, and we heard Vishnu and we heard Bassirou, it will not just be easy to find adequate partners also for long-term projects as they are planned within R4D.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I really feel that we are almost baked now, but we need 10 more minutes to get the crust. And I would like to thank the panelists for their inputs. We were having a very living discussion despite of the heat. I would like you to take your seats again, because we cannot close this conference without acknowledging those who organized it. May I ask at the same time to come all the organizers and helpers of this conference to come up front at the same time while the others go back. Thank you very much.
Könnt ihr einfach vorher stehen? So? Ja, das ist gut. Aber Blümchen sind ja wohl. Okay, okay. Ja, ja, ja.
Now, this is nice. And you see, these are the people you have always seen, either inside or outside or carrying microphones. But what we don't see is the whole work behind the preparations and so on. So I just want to mention the names briefly. And I know that there are some flowers which are given to all of them, or only to the female part, to all of them. That is good. Yes. Of course, there has been a lot of prior support, if I may just say so, prior support during the conference, but in preparation of the conference, the printing out of posters, the compilation of the pre-conference proceedings, etc., etc. And for this, I particularly thank Miriam Lazzini. And Thomas, I hope you know her. And there is also one guy who was helping you, Miriam, Moritz Schönbachler. He is not here, so we will reserve the flower for him for the later stage. Now, you don't have to clap all the time. Let me read down first, and then we give a clap to all. Otherwise, we are really baked. Emmanuel Hayerle, the man on my side, together with Janine Tresch, that's you. You worked hard on the IT support during the conference, making it possible that everything functioned. I hope it did, of course. We know how difficult IT is. And then there is a large team, our team during the conference, who supported in plenary and parallel sessions, in the publication desk, registration, and everything else. And I want to read down the names. There are present is Nina Lauterburg. She's nodding a little bit. Seraina Bammert, also nodding, hopefully, that we know you. Lilian Drechsel. Tatenda Lehmann. Melchior Nussbaumer. Silvia Lörcher, here in the plenary all the time, almost. Julie Zerringer. Nikolaus Amacher. And there are two not present, Maria Paulsen and Elias Hodl, so we can give you a clap for this assistance during the conference. Now, I don't know if Tina Hirschbühl, is she here? Oh, you didn't come up front. Tina, of course you are with the communication and media, and this is almost your last working day with us, or is it not? Tina is already moving to a climate which is similar to the climate in this room, Bangkok, on Saturday, and you are more worried about the cats than about yourself, I know. And then somebody who did all the editing of abstracts and for the pre-conference proceedings, and who is sitting beside Tina is Ann Zimmermann, our editor for mountain research and development. Thank you very much, and whoever assisted you as well. There are two persons not here, Marlene Thibault and Anu Lannen, who were your assistants for this pre-conference proceeding work. Thank you very much. And also not present is the layout support, Simon Kummer. I think she is not here. And we thank Simon also for all the layouting. And finally, of course, and I know there is no flower for you, Thomas, but you are doing all the work in coordination together with the two persons who also did not list themselves, which is really not fair. And I wonder who is giving the flowers to you. Andrea Landolt. No flower. Are you sure? And Natalie Schäfer, the persons you know from email.